120-mile-per-hour wind, torrential rain, millions without power, at least 17 dead. Hurricane Milton hammered into Florida, making landfall as a Cat 3 storm, and then mowing across the state, spinning off tornadoes and submersing low-lying neighborhoods in floodwater.
This is home, and it's gone. Home is gone. So home ain't home no more.
What remains is a mess, which will demand yet to be calculated billions to repair and restore, generating collective misery that those of us living near the Texas coast have all experienced and wish on no one. Panel, it seems like every storm season we're forced to play Russian roulette with little choice but to hope for the best while preparing as best we can for the worst. All right, Bill King, you've been a mayor of a coastal city. You grew up on the coast. You have been asked to help build evacuation plans. Give us some of your thoughts here.
Yeah, I actually evacuated for Hurricane Carla in the 60s. Look, all the discussion right now is about climate change, and I believe that climate change is making storms worse. But NOAA says that's maybe a 10 or 15% factor. The damages from these storms over the last 40 years is up 10 times. So the storms have not gotten 10 times worse. So what is it that's driving all this increased damage? And it is that we're building more and more things and putting more and more people in harm's way. The population of the coastal counties that are affected by hurricanes from the Carolinas down through Texas has gone up over the last 50 years from about 9 million to over 30 million people. And we've encouraged that through a whole series of policies, not having strict enough building codes, subsidizing flood insurance. Look, we need to understand if you're going to live in these areas, there's a cost associated with that, and the people that live in those areas need to bear that cost.
Nyanza Moore, out in Fort Bend County, they're already being hit with the cost, correct?
Yeah, one of the things about living in a coastal community, I live in Brazoria County, and it borders on Fort Bend. I do pay 2 different HOA fees, so it's kind of weird. But if you were in a coastal community and you didn't realize that let's take, for example, Allstate. If you had Allstate for your homeowner's insurance for the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, you may not have gone over to look at your policy when you had to renew, but you may have noticed that you don't have the same coverage. If you just had the hurricane come through and do any damage to your property, then you will notice that if you called Allstate and say, hey, I need to make a claim for wind damage, they're gonna say, I'm sorry, we don't carry you anymore. If you are in one of the coastal communities like Brazoria County and the lower edge of Harris County and Fort Bend County, then you are forced off of your insurance policy and forced to be onto either Texas Windstorm Insurance Agency or Texas Fair Plan. So if you didn't get one of those windstorm protections, you were basically obliterated, and that's what needs to change.
All right, Holly, boy, does it sound like government-controlled insurance is in our future, you know, subsidized by the rest of the taxpayers?
It certainly sounds that way, and I think you're going to have a stronger argument, though, for subsidizing those policies in the state of Texas than you do in the state of Florida. I grew up in Florida, so love my Florida family and friends there. But in Texas, you have industries along the coastline that are very important not only to the United States but the entire world, and you need employees to work at those industries, petrochemical refineries and so forth, and so you're going to see a strong push to have those subsidized insurance policies, and hopefully they can improve those, because there's a lot of complaints about the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, right, and what it's actually covered, and a lot of people who are covered by that are very disappointed in what they get out of it. Yeah, I think you're going to have to bolster this, and it is just going to be more expensive to live in these coastal areas. Love Florida, but by and large, you know, it's a big retirement community and tourist destination, a little less important to national security.
Okay, so a little spoiler alert. Bill's probably going to talk about the Ike Dike and the B-block. You know, but look, we do have our national security dependent upon the function of the Texas petrochemical industry. Thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially in that area, it's important because of the petroleum chemical industry in our port of Houston, which is very dynamic, is huge, is the largest in the nation. It's important to make sure that we have emergency personnel prepared and also have everything prepared the infrastructure for in case another hurricane or a winter storm or anything happens if you live in the coast area. But by the way, Bill, I was born during Hurricane Carla.
Gary, Bill makes the important point that population density along the coast is part of the problem. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think that's true, but I think the other problem is, and I think if you take a look at how things are working in Washington, as Bill has talked about so many times, it's dysfunctional. Things are not getting done. We're going to talk about the Ike Dike in the next block, but there are ideas and programs that can be put in place to minimize damage, and part of it's building code, part of it's restricting where people can build, but the government can't get anything done. I mean, that's the norm here. What have we done to prevent future flooding in our neighborhood if we get a hurricane that comes up the ship channel? Short answer, not much. So people need to start getting out of the government to do their stuff, or maybe they need to subcontract to the private sector and they'll get it done.
Bill, wailing and gnashing of teeth along Brays Bayou, where I live, post Harvey, post tax day, post Memorial Day flood. A lot of those houses had to be lifted at great cost. That was done by government dictate. Thoughts there? Is that kind of an example of what needs to be done?
Now, look, if you're going to live on a big flat coastal plain like we do, that's subject to flooding, both hurricane surge flooding and upland flooding, then you've got to build everything higher, and you've got to do a better job of getting the water out of the neighborhoods. By the way, we've made a lot of improvements on Brays Bayou. We haven't had a flood over there now in several years, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've done a lot of work on that bayou. But there are about 10 other bayous that we've done basically nothing on in the city. So it's exactly what Gary says. We've got to have government actually start doing some of these things, and because we keep fighting over all this partisan nonsense, we can't get things done.
All right, 20 seconds, Holly. Do you keep an eye on Texas windstorm? I mean, they don't have that much money.
Listen, I'm one of their customers, and I'm not happy. So, and because I was forced onto Texas windstorm without my other options, other Texas Fair Plan, I'm still unhappy, and they're not doing everything that they're supposed to do.
But you have some coverage.
But I have coverage, and I have a tarp on my roof.
All right.